This story starts in a school, where we find a girl lost in thought about her brother. Her moment of contemplation is suddenly interrupted when another girl bursts into the classroom, frantically calling for everyone's attention. She excitedly announces that she's just seen the cutest guy in the office. Apparently, he's a new transfer student and a third year. As soon as the girl from before hears this, she realizes it must be her brother. Before we dive deeper into the story, the girl narrates that her brother was thought to have died in a plane crash with their parents. But miraculously, he returned after 10 long years. When she saw her brother for the first time, she could hardly believe her eyes. Their grandpa had the same reaction upon seeing him alive. When her brother looked at her, she was startled, but he just smiled in response and asked if she was his sister Dayon. Suddenly, Dayon is yanked out of her flashback by a bunch of girls trying to bully her. These troublemakers demand that she hand over the gym uniform she's brought with her. Dayon tries to reason with them, pointing out that if she gives up her uniform, she won't have anything to wear. Blondezilla just snickers at this and then starts yelling at her. She's so loud that even the other girls in the classroom can't ignore the commotion she's causing for no good reason. Blondezilla finally crosses the line and smacks Dayon on the head, making it clear that she better hand over the uniform, or else she won't be nice to her anymore. While I wouldn't exactly call slapping someone on the head being nice, I guess no one is about to argue with this over-the-top Blondezilla. Even the other girls in the classroom just look away, not wanting to get involved or stop her from getting all high and mighty. It looks like Dayon has no choice but to face the humiliation and silently comply with the demand. The next scene takes us to third year class 2, where the entire class is being introduced to this new handsome fella, who has just transferred into this school. The teacher mentions that he's been living overseas for a long time and asks everyone to be friendly and help him settle in. All the girls in the class can't help but blush at how hot he is. Even the bullies in the room can't resist sneering, while the other students with average looks feel a pang of jealousy at the new guy's good looks. The teacher directs him to an empty seat at the back of the room, and he makes his way over, ready to get settled in his new spot. As the new guy walks to his seat, we spot a redhead guy named Jae-hyung, and we can tell that he is feeling absolutely annoyed. Let's face it, he's just jealous that this new guy is stealing the spotlight with his looks. The big guy seated behind Jae-hyung gives a subtle signal. Jae-hyung quickly catches on to what his friend is trying to say and decides to take action. He extends his foot out, aiming to trip the new guy as he walks by. But Jae-hyung's plan doesn't go as smoothly as he'd hoped, because this new guy quickly halts, leaving Jae-hyung gritting his teeth in frustration. He had timed his foot extension perfectly, but it still didn't work at all. Meanwhile, the new guy, who goes by the name Jin by the way, just gives Jae-hyung a death glare for his pathetic attempt, though he does not say a word. The scene then flashes back to Jin's past, where we see a blonde guy advising Jin to avoid getting into fights once he returns to Korea. Jin lets out a sigh and responds that he's already aware of this much. The senior perks up to hear this, and curiously asks about how Jin knows. Jin then explains that he wouldn't enter any combat situation without having enough intel about his surroundings. Well, it looks like Jin's response isn't exactly what the senior was expecting to hear, because it sounds way too hardcore. But Jin continues, sharing his wisdom from years of experience. He explains that making a rash decision could cost him his life, and such a mistake would be a rookie move. This makes the senior even more uncomfortable. And our boy goes on to remind his senior that he has survived plenty of battlefields over the past 10 years, because he knows his stuff. Suddenly, Major Kang, the senior, tells Jin to stop and clarifies that he wasn't referring to all this strategic nonsense, but rather, he does not want our boy to engage in fights because he wants to prevent the poor offender from getting beaten up badly. In the present moment, Major's advice lingers in our boy's mind, so he does not say anything to the bully in order to avoid fighting. The teacher then notices Jin standing there idly and asks if everything's okay. Jin simply flashes a pleasant smile, saying he is good, and continues past Jae-hyung, ignoring him. Jae-hyung snickers once again, thinking Jin is just a wimp afraid of getting picked on. Even the guy who tried to trip him earlier smiles, pleased with Jin's reaction. Once Jin reaches his seat, the teacher tells one of the students to help him get ready for the first class. With that, the teacher leaves after wishing Jin a good time studying. The student sitting next to Jin quickly introduces himself as Youngchan Park, and our boy returns the gesture, introducing himself as Ijin Yu. Youngchan then nervously glances over his shoulder to make sure no one's watching, and leans in to whisper to our boy that he saw what Jae-hyung was trying to do. He explains that Jae-hyung Lee is a troublemaker, but there's also another bully to watch out for, which is Hyuk-jin Ju, who's just as bad. Jin takes a closer look at both of the troublemakers, while Youngchan further reveals that the next class is math. Jin thanks his new friend for the heads up, and Youngchan is relieved to see that our boy isn't just another bully. He tells our boy to feel free to ask him anything, and he'll do his best to help out. The math teacher arrives and instructs everyone to open their textbooks. He starts solving math problems on the board. Some students are busy taking notes, while others look utterly bored. Jin takes in the scene, noticing that Young-chan is diligently paying attention, while some students are dozing off or messing around on their smartphones. He also glances out the window and sees a group of students playing in the playground. Jin's mind drifts back to his days as a mercenary. He remembers the heavy rain, feeling utterly exhausted and battered. The chaos of his past life, the constant roar of guns and explosions, seems to have left a permanent mark on his mind. Yet, in the present moment, as he closes his eyes, there's no unpleasant noise. Everything feels unexpectedly peaceful and serene. As dawn approaches, students start heading home. Among them is Dayan, who spots her brother standing nearby. She's momentarily startled and asks if he's been waiting for her. He replies that yes, he was hoping to walk her home. However, he adds that if she has other plans, she's welcome to go on her own. Dayan quickly glances around and insists she has no other plans, but we can tell that she is still really anxious about walking with our boy. Jin then states that if she doesn't have anything pressing, they'll walk home together. Eventually, the girl agrees. Later on the street, the siblings walk side by side, both clearly feeling awkward. Jin tries to break the ice, and asks if she's feeling awkward too. Dayan is startled to hear this, and quickly insists she's not awkward at all. But Jin reassures her that it's okay, as he's feeling pretty awkward himself. Thankfully, this remark finally makes our girl relaxed a bit. Jin then reveals that he was only 9 at the time of the accident, so he doesn't remember much about his remaining family, including his sister. He points out that it must be pretty strange for her too, since she was only 7 and probably doesn't remember much either. Dayan stays silent, because this is in fact true. Just then, she suddenly hears some familiar voices around the corner, and her feet suddenly come to a halt. When Dayan looks at the source of the voice, she spots one of the girls who bullied her in class. She is apparently the friend of that blonde girl who slapped Dayan in the school today. The bully girl immediately notices Dayan and calls her out. Dayan breaks into a sweat, feeling uncertain about how she is going to handle the situation. One of the guys sitting with the bully girl asks who Dayan is. The bully girl reveals that Dayan is the girl Huijin dislikes, and Huijin is the same blonde girl who slapped her earlier. The bully girl also spots her brother walking along with Dayan and starts teasing her, asking if she's out with her boyfriend. She adds some colorful remarks, saying she didn't know bitches could date as well. Our girl quickly gets timid, and frantically tries to reassure her that Jin is just her brother. Well, this comes as a surprise to the bully girl, who didn't know Dayan had a brother. After hearing the rude comments, Jin asks Dayan if this girl is a friend of hers. Dayan timidly agrees, and admits they know each other from their homeroom. But the cocky girl doesn't let up, calling Dayan a bitch again and asks since when they became friends. Dayan trembles as the bully continues her rant. Jin then gives the girl a cold stare, one that's enough to freeze the hell itself. The guy sitting next to the bully girl doesn't appreciate Jin's sharp glare. He gets annoyed and warns Jin to watch himself if he doesn't want to get his ass yanked. Jin continues to glare, which only annoys the fatty more. The bully girl starts egging him on and provokes him to pick a fight with Jin. Eventually, the fatty's patience wears thin and he strides over to our boy, and Jin quickly shoves Dayan back and gets face to face with this stupid head. The fatty demands to know if Jin is trying to act tough in front of his sister. Jin notices how defenseless the fatty is, standing so close that all his vital points are wide open for attack. What's even more amusing is that the fatty isn't carrying any weapons. All he has is this giant ass of his. Jin can't help but feel that this guy is being rash and leaving himself wide open. But then, Major Kang's words echo in his mind once again, which reminds him to not pick fights with anyone. Jin lets out a sigh, averts his gaze, and decides to walk away quietly. But Fatty isn't letting Jin off the hook so easily. He grabs Jin by the collar and raises his hand, ready to deliver a sharp slap to Jin's face. Before he can make contact, Dayan rushes to intervene. She quickly bows down her head and explains to the bully that Jin has been living overseas for most of his life and isn't used to the way things work in Korea. On the other hand, the bully girl snickers to see her begging, while Dayan continues to tremble with fear. The fatty, however, snaps at Dayan, saying he doesn't care if Jin was living overseas or not. Seeing his sister so terrified and shaking in fear boils Jin's blood. Fueled by anger, he grabs Fatty's wrist and yanks it. Fatty squirms in pain, even though Jin hasn't done anything particularly aggressive. Jin throws his bag down and takes off his school coat. Calmly, he tells his sister to wait for him and covers her face with the coat, assuring her it won't take more than a minute. Just then, the rowdy thug charges at him from behind. Jin effortlessly twirls around and delivers a solid slap to the thug's face. The single slap sends the thug staggering, blood spilling from his mouth as he stumbles backward and crashes to the ground like a sack of potatoes. The cocky girl and the other goon feel a chill run down their spines, and I can tell they are about to crap their pants if our boy continues like this. Meanwhile, Jin lets out a sigh of disappointment, knowing he's broken his promise to Major Kang. But I guess this is not his fault entirely, as this fatty bastard had this coming. The other goon is so terrified that he has started to reconsider making any move against our boy. The next scene takes us to the countryside, where military soldiers are training tirelessly. Among them is Major Kang, overseeing the rigorous exercises. A fellow soldier approaches from behind and reminds Kang that today is Jin's first day at school. Hearing this, Major Kang gets concerned that despite 6 months of lessons on leading a normal life, Jin might struggle to adapt to his normal school life after so many years as a mercenary. But still, Kang feels a sense of pride, and he's confident that the lessons he imparted to Jin will help him thrive in his new life. Well, it turns out Major Kang's teachings didn't quite do the trick, because Jin is making these bullies look like yesterday's trash. The other bullies watch in shock as the injured fatty lies unconscious, eyes rolled back. The bully girl and her sidekick are shaking with fear as Jin strides toward them. In a flash, Jin lunges and lands a devastating punch right in the gut of the other thug, sending him flying and crashing to the ground. The cocky girl's jaw drops in disbelief. When Jin turns his attention to her, his death glare makes her tremble with fear. Daeon pulls the coat off her face, her hands trembling as she takes in the sight of the 2 thugs down for the count. Even though it's only been a minute since she was covered, Jin notices his sister watching him and, after giving the cocky girl one last intimidating look, he walks away from her. He turns to Daeon and apologizes for covering her face so abruptly. The apology only makes Daeon feel more awkward, so Jin tries to lighten the mood by suggesting they grab some snacks from her favorite store. Daeon stammers that it's okay and they don't need to, so Jin decides they should just head home. As Daeon and Jin cozy up, the bully girl is left terrified to see this. She's completely blown away by how this guy who was so terrifying with just a glare is now acting like a sweet, caring brother. As the siblings walk off together, Daeon gives her one last friendly wave before they head out, leaving the bully girl standing there, face frozen in terror. As they walk home, Daeon asks Jin if he was the one who knocked out those 2 guys earlier. Jin confirms it, and this only makes her curious about her brother, since he doesn't seem like the type to pick fights. She then explains that in Korea, staring at people like he did can be considered rude and might lead to uncomfortable situations. Jin agrees, adding that meeting someone's gaze can be risky depending on who you're staring at, which is similar to where he's from. Confused, Daeon asks why he stared at those thugs earlier. Jin simply replies that he noticed she was scared and he wanted to protect his sister. Daeon is startled by these unexpected responses, and she simply bows her head down while blushing. An awkward silence falls between them as they continue walking. It looks like Daeon will need to get used to having a caring brother around to look out for her. When they get back to the apartment, we see Grandpa is a bundle of nerves. He frantically tells Jin to just chill and enjoy some fruit, but our boy insists on taking care of the dishes himself. Grandpa's not sure how to handle this, so he eventually lets Jin take over. As Jin washes up the dishes with a steady hand, Grandpa asks if the dinner was okay, admitting he's not exactly a master chef. Jin, keeping it casual, tells Grandpa not to sweat it. He says the food has been great and he's loved every meal. The old man looks visibly relieved to hear that Jin enjoyed the food. You can even see the glimmer of satisfaction on his face. Grandpa then turns to Daeon, asking if she liked the food as well. She nods and agrees. Next, Grandpa shifts gears and asks Jin about his first day of school, and he is curious to know if anything interesting happened. Jin hesitates for a moment, looking a bit anxious about answering. Daeon also feels a bit uneasy, reflecting on how eventful the day has been. But after a moment of pause, Jin admits that it was a good day. Grandpa's face lights up with genuine pleasure at hearing this, clearly relieved and happy. Once everyone hits the bed for the night, we find our guy still wide awake. His mind flashes back to when his grandpa first saw him, and he can almost feel how grateful his old man was to have him around. Jin's cold heart has slowly started to warm up after living with his grandpa and sister for a while. Then, his thoughts drift to the time he was stuck on that airplane before it crashed. Passengers were in a panic, and the emergency oxygen masks had popped out of the compartments. As everyone scrambled to put on their masks, Jin's parents focused on making sure their son could breathe safely. It was a terrifying day for him. Just as the plane began its downward plunge, Jin jolts awake in the present, leaping out of bed in shock and breathing heavily from this nightmare. His heart is racing, and he finally realizes it was just a dream. He glances at his clock and sees that morning has arrived. As he sits there alone, he hears rattling noises coming from the living room. He stands up and goes out, only to find his sister preparing breakfast for the day. He looks around and asks where Grandpa went. She tells him that Grandpa left for work at dawn. She explains that Grandpa took time off to be home when Jin arrived, but now his paid holidays are over, so he's back to work. She also puts on her uniform, and once she's done, she decides to leave for the day. She tells Jin that breakfast is laid out on the table and reminds him to make sure he eats. With that, she heads out, and Jin glances back at the spread of food left for him. Back at school, we see the same bully girl and the blonde girl, Huijin. It turns out Huijin has discovered that the transfer student from yesterday is Dion's brother. The bully girl anxiously confirms this. Her mind flashes back to their previous encounter with Jin, and she feels devastated remembering how he knocked out 2 of her friends with just 1 punch. Huijin tries to ask why the bully girl is so scared, but the bully girl remains frozen in fear, unable to speak. I have grown tired of calling her a bully girl, so let's just give her an appropriate name, and let's call her Chicken Shake from this point onward. Huijin continues to press Chicken Shake about what happened. Finally, Chicken Shake swallows her fear and says they should stop picking on Daeon from now on. The glare Jin gave her is still burned into her mind and she can't shake it off. Despite her fear, she tries to reassure herself that everything will be fine because Huijin and her brother are basically the top dogs, and everyone at school bows down to them. After a while, we see Daeon again. As usual, she gets brutally smacked on the head. When she turns around, she sees Huijin and Chicken Shake together, once again there to bully her. Daeon quickly asks what they both want now, to which Huijin tells her to come with her for a second. Our girl asks where they are going. The cocky blonde is clearly ticked off and snaps at Daeon, telling her not to get too big for her boots and to follow orders if she doesn't want to get beaten down. She adds that having a brother isn't going to change a thing. A little while later, we find ourselves at the school's recycling station, where Daeon is getting absolutely pummeled by the cocky blonde. After a few solid kicks, the blonde tells Daeon to keep her head down. Daeon, trying to catch her breath, asks why she's getting beaten up in the first place. That's when Huijin reminds her about her brother. She tells Daeon that her brother doesn't have to act like a tough guy and warns her to explain to her brother to stop getting so full of himself. She further makes it clear that they won't be responsible for Daeon's brother anymore because he's in for one hell of a ride. Daeon, still clueless, asks if that means they're targeting her brother from now on. Huijin quickly confirms, reminding her that the 2 bullies our boy took down were friends of her brother. Since Daeon and her brother dared to mess with them, they're not going to get off easy. It's like poking a lion and expecting not to get mauled. Daeon's face goes absolutely pale upon hearing this. She yells at the 2 thugs, demanding to know what they're planning to do with her brother. But all she gets in response is a solid slap across the face for speaking out of turn. The slap leaves a bruise on her cheek, but the sting of the physical pain is nothing compared to the ache she feels knowing her brother is in serious trouble. Daeon clenches her jaw, steels herself, and bolts out of the recycling station, leaving the 2 thug women behind. The scene cuts back to 3rd year class 2. The atmosphere is thick with anxiety. Even the 2 average bullies in the class are unusually quiet. Everyone's on edge because the school's biggest bully is strolling into the classroom with his entourage, and it looks like the drama with Jin is about to kick off big time. But Jin just sits there cool as a cucumber. The 2 bullies who got knocked down yesterday are also strolling down with their boss. Behind them, the biggest bully of all, the top dog, looms large. Right on cue, Daeon bursts into the room like a tornado. She's panting heavily, her face is bruised, and her uniform is smeared with dirt. Jin abruptly stands up from his seat, and his eyes widening in shock as he takes in the sight of his sister's battered face and filthy uniform. The bully boss starts up with some banter, teasing how Jin's sister is worried sick about her brother. He points out how his own sister, Huijin, all she does is whine and nag at him to do things for her. Huijin also strolls into the scene, and reminds her brother that she will only feel sorry when her brother actually gets his ass handed to him by someone. Meanwhile, Jin is left visibly petrified seeing his sister so bruised up. But before we can see his reaction, the scene cuts back a little to the past, when students were just starting to gather in the classroom early in the morning. We see the terrified face of Youngchan taking hits to the head from 2 rowdy individuals who are using his face for target practice. Jae-hyung is feeling pretty cocky about his direct headshot and brags to his friend about it. Hyokjin then gets ticked off and demands this nearby student to hand over his eraser. Once the timid student offers his eraser, Hyokjin quickly takes it. He swings his hand with all his might and delivers a precise headshot to Youngchan. He breaks into a happy dance after landing the perfect hit, but Jae-hyung tries to downplay it, saying this was just a lucky shot. The 2 friends go back and forth, trying to outdo each other with their headshot skills. Jae-hyung decides to take another shot, swinging his hand violently and throwing the eraser down at the poor Youngchan. But surprisingly, Jin steps in, and the eraser hits him in the waist instead. The 2 bullies are annoyed by this sudden interruption, and the eraser falls to the ground. Jin then takes his seat right next to the terrified Youngchan. The redhead is visibly ticked off, feeling Jin is finally getting on his nerves. Hyokjin decides to talk some sense into Jin for stepping in, and the redhead quickly agrees. Meanwhile, our boy simply puts his bag on the desk and asks Youngchan if he's alright. The poor fella mutters that he is fine, but we can tell by his pale face he is not fine at all. Youngchan simply leans toward our boy for avoiding any eye contact with those bullies, and asks our boy if they should hang out after school. Jin reveals that he has to walk home with his sister, so he can't hang out. The timid boy perks up at this, and asks if his sister transferred here with him. Jin shakes his head, saying she was already studying here before he arrived. When Youngchan asks her name, Jin tells him it's Daeon. Youngchan is startled to hear this, and Jin notices his sudden reaction, so he asks his friend if he knows her. At first, Youngchan feels reluctant to say anything, but admits that Daeon isn't having the best time at school lately. He explains that she was quite popular back in middle school for being smart and pretty, which attracted a lot of attention from the guys. But then a blonde girl named Hui Jin, who was jealous, started bullying her. Jin asks if no one stopped them from bullying Daeon. Youngchan reveals that the girl who used to bully her, Hui Jin, has a brother named Gisu Kim, who's one of the worst troublemakers at their school. What's even worse is that Daeon is stuck in the same homeroom as Hui Jin, and she gets bullied to the point where every student is amazed that she still has the courage to come to school. Jin puts 2 and 2 together and realizes that Hui Jin started bullying his sister just because someone liked Daeon, and that's the only reason she's being targeted. But Youngchan somberly reveals that this is just an excuse, because Hui Jin simply wanted a reason to bully someone. Jin's mind flashes back to several days before, when his grandpa hoped that Jin would have an easier time adjusting to his new school after living overseas for so long. The grandpa then turns to his granddaughter and asks if she's doing well in school too. At that time, little Daeon charmingly assures her grandpa that she's doing absolutely fine, and never shows a hint of the grievances she faces at school on a daily basis. Her grandpa praises her, noting that Daeon is always a brilliant student, and even her teachers speak highly of her. In the present moment, Jin realizes that his sister was just putting on a brave face and hiding her struggles to keep their grandfather from worrying. Then, one of the rowdy bullies kicks the door open, and the entire gang of school bullies saunters into the classroom. Hyokjin quickly asks these rowdy bunch what they're doing in their class. Gisu Kim, one of the top dogs of the entire school, just says he's there to handle some business. Hyokjin's surprised to see Gisu and is not sure what to do. You see, Hyokjin is a small fry, while he can deal with the other bullies pretty fine, but he doesn't want to get tangled up with Gisu Kim. Meanwhile, Gisu's lackeys inform him about Jin. When Gisu sees Jin, he starts shouting at his lackeys, furious that they got their butts kicked by a scrawny little punk. He dismisses his lackeys and provocatively flicks his finger at Jin, telling him to come over. Jin stands up immediately, while the redhead and Hyokjin look totally confused about what Jin did to tick off Gisu, and they're pretty sure he is pretty much screwed now. Meanwhile, Jin stands his ground defiantly and asks if Gisu is actually the big shot here. Gisu sneers, and he finds it fascinating that our boy took his sweet time to figure out who is in charge here. He turns to his lackey and tells him not to just stand there like an idiot and to make a move. But we can clearly tell that the lackey is absolutely scared, but he eventually steps forward towards Jin. But before the showdown starts, Daeon also bursts into the classroom, breathing heavily. In the current time, this is how Jin finds himself looking at his bruised-up sister. Tears well up in Daeon's eyes as she starts apologizing to Jin for putting him into trouble. Meanwhile, Hui Jin scoffs after seeing those tears, and calls her the biggest drama queen ever. Jin, however, tells his sister she has nothing to apologize for. Before she can say another word, he loses it and slaps this lackey across the face with such force that he hits the ground, knocked out cold. The other bullies, who already know how hard Jin can hit, start to tremble. With one lackey down, Jin turns to his sister and says that these bullies are the ones who should be apologizing. The fatty charges at Jin with a clenched fist, but Jin effortlessly pushes his hand away. When he spots the exposed throat, Jin delivers a brutal, precise smack to it, like a ninja, leaving the bully spitting and coughing before collapsing to the floor. The other lackey, shaking with fear, tries to land a hit on Jin. Jin responds with a crushing blow to his ribs, and with lightning-fast reflexes, sends the lackey tumbling to the ground. Meanwhile, Gisu's confidence has finally started to fade away, as he sees our boy effortlessly taking down his bullies like they're nothing. The local lackeys of this class, who are still in their beta stage, stand there wide-eyed and expressionless. Even Huijin and Chicken Shake are freaking out, completely losing their composure. After taking down the last 2 bullies, Jin turns to Gisu and makes it clear that his sister has been suffering because of these thugs, and he's not about to stand for it. Gisu finally decides to speak, sneering as he admits that Jin is not a pushover after all. With a smirk, Gisu swings his leg with lightning speed toward Jin's face. But Jin effortlessly blocks the kick, leaving Gisu absolutely stunned, because he did not expect our boy to react so fast. Nonetheless, Gisu quickly swings his other leg, which is also blocked by Jin quite easily. Jin seizes Gisu's leg, pulls him closer, and delivers a brutal punch to his face, The punch sends blood spraying everywhere as Gisu crashes to the ground like a rag doll. His nose and mouth are bleeding, and he looks up in horror at Jin, who towers above him like a goddamn Death Reaper. Without hesitation, Jin swings his leg again, striking the bastard in the face with a powerful kick that sends more blood splattering. The guy, who was once cocky and full of himself, finally hits the ground, defeated and humiliated. The entire class falls silent, eyes wide in shock as they watch Jin take down one of the biggest bullies in one fell swoop. The two beta bullies are slack-jawed as well, unable to believe that our boy just took down a major player like Gisu so effortlessly. The girls are equally horrified, with the blonde especially stunned, unable to fathom if Jin is really this formidable. Jin starts walking towards Huijin, who is feeling terrified because she does not want to get slapped and face the same brutal treatment. But before anything else can happen, Diane rushes to stop her brother, pleading with him not to do anything anymore. Jin reminds her that Huijin and her crew have been bullying her for a long time, and he also knows that she was targeted by them yesterday as well. Diane's face falls as she realizes her brother has uncovered the truth, and she bows her head in silence. She then suddenly realizes that Jin is fighting for her sake, so she quickly forces a smile, telling her brother that she's fine and he should stop. Her brother hesitates at first, but eventually agrees, deciding to walk her to class. As they leave, the students in the room erupt into murmurs, unable to believe that Gisu, the top dog, was taken down by a single boy. Even the beta bullies admit that Jin is hardcore, and they are feeling a wave of relief that they didn't try to take him on earlier. As the chatter continues, the blonde girl trembles in a mix of fear and humiliation, unable to process her defeat. Meanwhile, as Jin and Diane walk together, she expresses her shock at how good her brother is at fighting, but then starts apologizing again. Confused, Jin asks what she's apologizing for. Daeon explains that it was her fault he got dragged into this mess. She feels responsible for the fights he had to endure, both yesterday and today. Jin gives Diane a reassuring smile, telling her she doesn't need to apologize for anything, because this is what families are for, to protect each other. He then begins to explain that back where he used to live, everyone only looked out for themselves. They didn't care what happened to others as long as they weren't the ones suffering. But even those people would act differently when their own families were involved. That is when the scene cuts down into the memory lane, to a chaotic battlefield, with smoke and explosions tearing through the area. Gunfire and bombardments echo from both sides. In the middle of the madness, we see a younger Jin, caught in the mayhem. Among the carnage, he spots one of the opposing soldiers desperately trying to save his little daughter, shielding her from a man who is holding his gun right over their faces. Even in the middle of the violence, the sight of that soldier risking everything for his child left a deep impression on Jin. It made him question what family truly meant and why it was so important. In the current moment, Diane points out that he barely remembers her. So why is he still going out of his way to help? The boy agrees, admitting it's true he doesn't remember her, but insists that doesn't change the fact that they're family. The girl just stands there in silence, but just as our boy's words sink inside her mind, she starts to feel a bit embarrassed. She quickly tells him she's fine and that he should head back to his class. She points out that they're already at her homeroom, so she waves a final goodbye and vanishes, leaving the boy with a faint smile on his face. Back in his room, Jin is still the hot topic of conversation, and he's feeling a bit awkward with all the attention he is getting. The beta bullies then flash him a thumbs up, cheerfully asking what kind of lessons he got overseas because he took those noobs down like they were yesterday's leftovers. They keep showering him with praise, but the boy just sinks into his seat, looking a bit overwhelmed. Even his friend Yongchun chimes in, saying he was actually pretty awesome, which brings a subtle smile to Jin's face. Meanwhile, we shift to the defeated goons, who are feeling pretty anxious after their embarrassing loss. Their boss, in particular, is still fuming, grumbling that there's something different about our boy, because he doesn't fight like your average third-rate thug. His sister tries to cheer him up, reminding him to stop sulking and pointing out that their loss was just a fluke, and Jin just caught them off guard, so she suggests they should try to catch him later. But the bullies stay silent, because they've learned the hard way that our boy is a powerhouse not to be messed with. Still, the blondie reminds her that he's just one guy, and they shouldn't let some dude take us down like this. Her brother finally shuts her up, telling her if she's itching for a fight, she can go take on the boy herself if she thinks it's so easy. Of course, Huijin doesn't like the way her brother's talking to her, so she snaps back that he shouldn't take his frustration out on her just because he got his butt handed to him by some random guy. Her brother is absolutely furious, and it's clear Huijin's words hit him hard. He is seething in anger because we all know that she is speaking some uncomfortable truth. Huijin glares at him one last time, her eyes welling up with tears from the frustration of seeing her brother act like this. Quietly, she turns around and slams the door behind her as she leaves. As she stomps down the corridor, Chicken Shake catches up with her from behind. Meanwhile, Blondie is absolutely fuming. It's incredibly frustrating for her that all those bullies couldn't handle just one guy. She slams the door open as she storms into the classroom, and when she sees Daeon sitting in the classroom, she asks our girl that she must be feeling pretty lucky to have a brother now. She reminds her how she now can go to school without a care in the world, and can just run to her big brother if she gets into trouble. Daeon doesn't say a word in response, which only makes Huijin more annoyed. She thinks Daeon is giving her the cold shoulder just because she has her brother around. She grits her teeth in frustration and makes it clear that she won't let Daeon do whatever she wants just because she has a brother. As dusk starts to settle, students begin heading home, and among the crowd is our girl, looking pretty dejected. She's lost in thought, recalling the scene where her brother stood up for her and fought those thugs. She remembers him saying they're a family, and wonders if this means she can finally go to school without worrying about getting bullied. Her mind drifts back to her miserable days under Huijin's rule, where she was constantly bossed around and obeyed every command like a faithful dog. Whenever she tried to speak up for herself, she'd get slapped down. Suddenly, her brother appears behind her and asks if something's bothering her. She is startled by this sudden call, but our boy reminds her that he'd called her a few times already. But she did not respond. The sister quickly says sorry, explaining she didn't hear him, and then asks if he was waiting for her again. The boy nods, saying he was because he still doesn't know his way back home. So, they start walking together, talking about how they should grab some groceries on the way, since Grandpa always gets super hungry when he's home late. As they walk side by side, that rowdy bitch stands behind them. She's looking utterly mad and just can't handle seeing the smile on our girl's face. This bitch is biding her time, waiting for the perfect moment to make Daeon forget how to smile. In the next scene, we see our duo is shopping around the store. The girl seems to be having a tough time choosing what to get, while people around the store are looking at our duo. Girls in the store can't seem to take their eyes off our boy, and Daeon can't help but notice how much attention he's drawing from the ladies. She knew he was popular at school, but it seems he stands out even outside of it. Out of curiosity, Daeon finally asks her brother if he's ever had a girlfriend back when he was overseas. The sudden question takes him by surprise, and he looks like he's never even heard of the term girlfriend before. Seeing his confusion, Daeon clarifies, saying she means a girl he might be dating. He simply replies that he hasn't had any, which prompts his sister to suggest that he should consider having a girlfriend, especially since he's always attracting girls like a magnet wherever he goes. The boy stays silent for a moment before saying that he's always been too busy to have time for a girlfriend. Daeon understands where he's coming from, especially since he's been busy adjusting to a new country. That's when the boy turns the question back on her, asking if she's ever had a boyfriend. The question catches her off guard, and she quickly replies that she hasn't had one either. When he asks why not, she just says she's been busy as well. When they finally get home, we see our boy has been gifted a Samsung Galaxy phone by his grandpa. He's a bit disappointed because he wanted an iPhone instead. Grandpa quickly educates his grandson that iPhones have lousy battery life, so it's better to use a Samsung instead, especially since all the kids nowadays have iPhones. It's kind of a funny jab, suggesting that having a Samsung might actually make him stand out. Daeon, on the other hand, is pretty excited because she wanted a Galaxy phone for herself, and she can tell it's the latest model. The boy starts playing around with the phone, while Grandpa reveals that he's already saved Daeon's and his own number in it. Daeon is surprised to find out that Grandpa saved the phone numbers himself since she usually helps with stuff like that. Grandpa quickly clears it up, saying he got some help from the salesperson. He adds with a grin that he's heard how the younger crowd loves to unbox new things themselves, so he hoped our boy wouldn't mind that he opened the box to save their numbers. In response, Jin quickly says he's totally fine with it. Grandpa then apologizes to Daeon, saying the store only had one of those phones, so he couldn't get one for her too. Daeon reassures him it's no big deal, and they end up having a great dinner, chatting and enjoying their family time. Later that night, the boy is still playing around with his new phone, and he is really digging into the Galaxy experience. He starts to think maybe Samsung phones aren't so bad after all, and could be even better than iPhones. The scene cuts to Major Kang, who's busy working at his computer when his phone rings. He picks it up and sees it's Jin, who lets his senior know that he's got a new phone and this is his new number from now on. The senior is a bit surprised by this news, and even the junior standing behind him asks if Major Kang didn't already give Jin a phone. Major Kang confirms that he did. That's when the senior gets tomato red with anger, pointing out that he had given Jin the most expensive iPhone they had, so he is kind of furious that Jin has changed his phone already. The next morning arrives, and Jin comes out of a cozy shower and notices his sister rushing out in her uniform. Before she leaves, Jin asks why she's heading out so early. She tells him she's actually running late and bolts out without wasting any time. She also reminds him that dinner is already set up, so all he has to do is put the dishes in the sink. As she's rushing down the street, she glances at her phone and is relieved to see that she'll make it on time. She had gotten delayed because she wanted to make a delicious soup for Grandpa, and seeing him smile after eating it made it all worth it. She's just happy to do something nice for him. Her moment of happiness is abruptly cut short when she gets a solid kick to her ribs and crashes to the ground. Standing over her are 3 girls, all decked out in hoodies and masks to hide their identities. The one at the front tells Daeon to watch where she's running and accuses her of nearly breaking her ankle. It's clear these girls are just looking for trouble and making excuses to pick a fight. They demand that Daeon apologize for her so-called blunder. The poor girl quickly nods and says she's really sorry. But the rowdy leader isn't satisfied and slaps Daeon across the face and insists she apologize like a whimpering dog. That's when one of the girls with a ponytail suggests they all head to a karaoke spot to blow off some steam. Another girl quickly agrees, saying that they definitely need to relax and have some fun. The ponytail girl crouches down to meet Daeon at eye level. With a smug grin, she invites our girl to join them in their karaoke session, and she is sure that they are going to have a blast there. The second Daeon hears that voice, she instantly recognizes that this is Huijin Kim, and she is definitely here to make our girl's life miserable. Before she knows it, they're all at a dingy karaoke place. The manager, catching sight of these shady-looking girls, can't help but feel uneasy. A while later, we see the manager again, who is pacing nervously toward the room where those girls had their karaoke session. He mutters to himself about how rowdy kids have gotten these days, and wonders what kind of mess those ladies might have left behind, because in their entire karaoke session, all he heard was loud screaming noises. The manager turns the lever and opens the door, only to find Daeon sprawled on the floor, clearly beaten up. Thankfully, she's conscious and starts to slowly get up. She fumbles with her things, her hands shaking as she gathers her stuff. The manager is utterly confused to see this unexpected sight and decides to call an ambulance, but Daeon flatly refuses and stumbles out the door. Meanwhile, back in the classroom, the teacher is taking attendance and notices that Daeon is still missing. When the students confirm she's not there, everyone is confused since Daeon wouldn't just skip school without letting anyone know. In the background, Huijin Kim is smirking, clearly pleased with herself. Chicken Shake turns to her friend and asks if she thinks Daeon will be okay. In response, Huijin simply tells her friend not to panic. She reminds her that Daeon missing school has nothing to do with them. Chicken Shake nervously agrees, playing along and affirming that it's indeed true and has nothing to do with them. Finally, the school bell rings, signaling the end of the day. As usual, the boy waits outside for his sister, but he can't seem to spot her in the crowd of students. The crowd begins to thin out, and soon there's hardly anyone around, but his sister is still nowhere in sight. He waits for a bit, then pulls out his phone and tries calling her, wondering if she might have gone home already. Meanwhile, she's already back home, and her phone rings endlessly as her brother keeps calling, but she doesn't bother to answer and lets it ring. Eventually, the boy heads back home. His eyes immediately spot the sneakers she wears sitting over the doorstep. He pulls off his bag from over his shoulder and goes to her door, giving it a gentle knock and asking if she's inside. The girl quickly responds, and the brother feels a wave of relief knowing she's indeed there. Daeon quickly asks if Jin waited outside the school today too. Jin no Diaz and mentions that he even tried calling her, but she didn't answer. The girl apologizes heartily, saying she must have been asleep. Jin picks up on the odd tone in her voice and asks if he can come in for a second. Daeon quickly comes up with an excuse, saying she's in bed because she's not feeling well. Worried, Jin asks if it's something serious. She reassures him that it's just a slight fever and that she'll be fine after some rest. Jin tells her to call him if she needs anything and decides to head out, planning to grab some medicine for her. But Jin suddenly stops at the door and notices that her sneakers are stained with blood. It doesn't take him long to realize something serious must have happened, since blood on her shoes isn't something you see every day. Once he pieces it together, he grabs the first aid kit and heads into her room to tend to her injuries. She winces as he applies bandages to her bruised face. It seems Jin still doesn't know the full story. Daeon tells him she fell down the stairs while trying to dodge a bicycle. However, Jin points out that her injuries seem quite severe for a simple accident, and asks if she doesn't want to see a doctor. She hesitates for a moment before insisting she's totally fine. I guess her hesitation to visit the doctor is understandable, because if she goes to the hospital, they'll discover the bruises aren't from a fall down the stairs. The scene then cuts to Daeon's past, where we find ourselves in the principal's office. Daeon is telling the principal that she was beaten up by Huijin. However, Huijin flatly denies the accusations. The police are also involved in the case, and Daeon insists that Huijin was the one who beat her up. She explains that Huijin was wearing a mask and hat, but she recognized her voice and is certain it was her. Besides, Huijin has a history of bullying her at school. But then Huijin, with a sly smirk, asks how Daeon can accuse her when she didn't even see her face. The principal questions Daeon if she saw the face of the person who assaulted her. Daeon responds once again that the assailant's face was covered, but she's sure it was Huijin. At this point, Huijin's mother bursts with anger. She angrily accuses Daeun of calling the police and treating her daughter like a criminal over a ridiculous accusation. The principal tries to calm the furious mother down, but she refuses to listen and makes it clear that she won't calm down. Meanwhile, Huijin's confidence crumbles as she realizes that no one seems to believe her, despite her certainty that Huijin was the culprit. Even the police officers are skeptical. The mother demands that Daeun apologize to her daughter immediately for the accusation. But our girl stands her ground and tells the woman that it was indeed her daughter who assaulted her. The arrogant mother is infuriated by this and decides she will take the matter up with Daeun's parents. She demands our girl to bring her parents to the school right away. This just breaks Daeun's heart. She feels tears streaming down her face involuntarily, while the villain who assaulted her laughs and walks away unpunished. In the present, she feels trapped in the same situation she faced in the past. She believes that raising her voice without solid proof is futile and is determined not to offend her grandfather, who has always been a supportive figure for her. Suddenly, Jin notices her tense expression and puts his hand on her forehead, asking if she's really okay. The girl responds, albeit weakly, that she's fine. Jin points out that while her bones aren't broken, the bruises are pretty severe and will hurt for a few days. She nods and finds it surprising that he's actually quite good at this patching up stuff, because she can tell the bandages are perfectly placed. She then becomes somber, remembering their grandfather. She's worried he might get upset about all this, especially since he has a weak heart. This news comes as a surprise to Jin, and the girl further reveals that their grandfather takes pills to regulate his heart health. In response, Jin promises her that he'll make sure their grandfather won't catch whiff of this predicament, and tells her to just get some sleep. As he begins to walk away, she calls out to him from behind. With a pleasant smile, she thanks him for all his help, and Jin reciprocates with the same warm smile. But once he's gone, her smile fades. She wonders if she did the right thing by not telling him everything. She feels that there's nothing a couple of teenagers like her and her brother can really do about the situation. However, we all know that Jin isn't an ordinary teenager, and I wouldn't be surprised if he already knows who was behind her injuries. Later, we find ourselves in a club where the high-energy music is blasting and people are buzzing. In the middle of it all, we spot the boss bully, Gisu Kim. He's gritting his teeth as he drinks and laughs with his boys. They're all discussing Jin and wondering how a single brat could manage to mess things up for everyone. One thug speaks up, reminding everyone that their downfall was due to underestimating Jin. He insists that they can take him out easily if they plan ahead. Another goon agrees, emphasizing that they can't just let him get away with this. A third adds that Jin won't stand a chance against all of them. Despite their enthusiasm, their boss knows that taking Jin down won't be a walk in the park. He's still seething from the humiliating defeat, but doesn't want to let it slide. He puts his glass down in frustration and reluctantly agrees with his lackeys. He makes it clear that going one-on-one isn't their style, so they might think of a strategic plan to take our boy down with numbers. The lackeys grin like Cheshire cats, clearly excited about their plan. This rowdy bunch may think they've got it all figured out, but they're nothing more than a pack of hyenas destined to get their comeuppance from Jin sooner or later. Just as they're planning their next move, Gisu's phone rings. The caller ID shows it's from someone labeled Little Bitch. It turns out to be his little sister, and it seems like even Gisu agrees with us that she indeed is a bitch. Anyway, she starts yelling at him, asking why he's just sitting around at the club. Gisu tells her to either say what she wants or he's hanging up. The girl insists that he owes her big time. Gisu confusingly asks what she's talking about. She then reveals that he roughed up Daeun earlier today. She tells him they can't let the siblings get away with it, or they'll lose their authority in the whole school. Her brother, feeling a bit proud of his sister, tells her she did a good job. He reveals that they're also planning to get payback on Jin. Just then, someone walks into the club. As the bullies turn to see who it is, they realize it's Jin. He appears to be there to settle some business. Gisu gets absolutely furious at the sight of Jin casually walking into his turf. But Jin just walks toward their table with a calm demeanor. Gisu then feels somewhat relieved that they don't have to hunt Jin down anymore to get their revenge. However, Jin isn't there for a friendly chat either, and without wasting any time, he grabs one of the lackeys by the face and slams him down hard against the edge of the table. Another lackey charges at him, but Jin's hand moves so fast that his single punch shatters all the ribs of the attacker. The bully leader and his lackeys grit their teeth seeing their goons go down. The rest of the crew charges at Jin, but my guy just stays cool as a cucumber. As they get close, he kicks one of them down effortlessly, like a true Sigma male. Next, he grabs this purple head and slams him down on the table with a brutal thud. While this purple head is cowering for his life, Jin doesn't stop there and slams this dude against the wall like a rag doll. Then he balls up his fist and delivers a devastating blow to the fatty's face. One of the thugs grabs a glass bottle and swings it at Jin, but my guy casually knocks the bottle from his hand and follows up with a brutal whack to his face. which leaves the thug bleeding his mouth out. Another bully charges from behind, but Jin ducks down, grabs his hand, twists it painfully, and then delivers a hard slap across his face. Jin throws the thug aside and then grabs another lackey by the face. He smashes the guy's ugly mug right into his knee, breaking the thug nose with a sickening crunch. With all the thugs down for the count, Gisu is left speechless, unable to process what's happening. Meanwhile, his sister is still on the line, and she quickly asks what's going on, because she has been hearing the loud commotion and chaos. Jin turns to Gisu with a chill in his voice, making Gisu shiver. He asks if he needs to repeat himself, because as far as Jin remembers, he's already told Gisu to stay away from his sister. Gisu is absolutely boggled out of his mind to see how the tables have turned. It's kind of ironic that they tried to gang up on Jin, only to end up getting their own gang banged. Jin fought like a pro, and wiped the floor with everyone in just a few seconds. Meanwhile, Jin continues to question Gisu, asking what his sister ever did to him. Gisu plays dumb, pretending he knows nothing, while secretly reaching for a glass on the table. He throws the glass at Jin with lightning speed, but Jin just steps back casually, letting the glass shatter against the wall. As he stands there nonchalantly, Gisu grabs a bottle and swings it at him. Our boy steps back once again, avoiding the hit, but when Gisu swings the bottle once more, Jin knocks it out of his hand and counters with a punch, sending the contents of the bottle splattering everywhere. Gisu tries to swing his fist this time, but my guy responds with another brutal smack to the bastard's face, leaving his nose bleeding like crazy. Gisu stumbles backward, gasping for air after the hit, while Jin remains cool and composed, not even breaking a sweat. Jin then asks this bastard what twisted pleasure he gets from harassing a helpless girl. In a desperate move, Gisu grabs a bottle, shatters it, and aims the sharp pieces at Jin's chest. But our boy shows no fear, and he quickly slaps Gisu's hand hard, making the bottle drop. Then he grabs Gisu by the throat and squeezes, causing him to struggle for breath. Gisu's feet trip over themselves as he struggles helplessly, and Jin forcefully drives him to the ground. The bastard writhes and squirms, desperately trying to break free from Jin's iron grip, but my guy doesn't let up. His hand pressed firmly on Gisu's throat, ensuring the once cocky bully knows exactly who's in control now. Jin then leans in and asks Gisu what he should do with him. Gisu, barely clinging to consciousness after the brutal beating, can't muster a response. Jin delivers his final warning, making it clear this is the last time he'll spare him. He warns him to stay away from his sister and to keep Huijin, who is Gisu's sister, in check as well. He emphasizes that if he hears even a rumor about Gisu or Huijin bothering his sister again, he'll be back to finish what he started. To drive his point home, Jin tightens his grip on the bastard's throat even further, pushing him to the brink of unconsciousness. The bully is now desperate and on the edge, starts squirming and apologizing profusely. After that, Jin finally releases his grip, leaving Gisu gasping for air and coughing violently as Jin walks away. As Jin walks out of the club, the staff inside exchange nervous glances, unsure of what just went down. Meanwhile, Huijin and her friend Chicken Shake are strolling down the street. Huijin has got a bad vibe and starts worrying that her brother might be in trouble. When they reach the club, they hear footsteps coming up the stairs, and it's Jin, casually making his exit. Huijin is caught off guard and isn't sure what to do. She shouts for Jin to stop, thinking she can still play it cool because no one can pin the blame of what she did to Daeon. But Jin doesn't even slow down. Huijin, now really nervous, starts backing away, trips, and falls hard on her butt. While she's rubbing her sore shoulder, Jin's phone rings. He checks it and sees it's his grandpa calling. After a quick chat, he simply turns around and just heads home quietly, leaving them curious about what he is even thinking. When Huijin enters the clubroom, the scene is a mess. Her brother and his lackeys are all battered and bruised. She immediately starts shouting at him, demanding to know how he got whooped by Jin again. But her brother, too exhausted to argue, cuts her off and tells her to stay the hell away from Daeon from now on. Huijin, not grasping the seriousness of the situation, keeps pushing back, asking what the hell he's talking about. Her brother, visibly frustrated, finally loses it. He grits his teeth and yells at her to leave our boy's sister the fuck alone. But Huijin doesn't back down and keeps shouting, questioning why he's so afraid of that bastard. That's the breaking point, and her brother snaps with his eyes blazing with anger. He makes it crystal clear that if she doesn't steer clear of Daeon, he'll make sure to mess her up himself. Yikes, these siblings have a seriously twisted way of dealing with each other. It's wild how casually they talk about screwing each other over. Huijin is shaken by her brother's outburst, and she begins to tear up. We're back with our boy, who spots the grandfather once again. They sit down on a bench in the park. First off, Grandpa apologizes for pulling our boy away while he was having fun with his friends, but our boy says it's all good. The old man then gets a bit sad, mentioning that Daeon got injured, and our boy was the one who treated his injuries. Our boy confirms it, and the old man explains that her injuries are pretty serious, but she refuses to go to the hospital. He shares how tough it's been raising Dayan on his own. He never really knew how to raise a young girl and was always working hard to put food on the table, and he is just grateful she's come this far on her own. Grandpa reflects on all those years and says that looking back, Dayan has given him so much more than he's ever been able to give her. He lost everything in that accident, and Dayan was the only thing that kept him going after the plane crash took everything away from him. It breaks his heart to see her so hurt, and not even tell him the real reason behind it. He wonders if she thinks he's too old to understand. He mentions a saying about how kids become distant from their parents as they grow older, so it must be even harder for her to reach out to an old grandpa. But our boy quickly reassures the old man that he's just overthinking. He points out that it's clear how much Grandpa loves Dayan, and he's sure Dayan loves him just as much. He tells Grandpa to stop worrying so much and promises that he'll look out for her at school. Hearing this, the old man is finally a bit relieved and genuinely happy that Dayan has a brother-like figure in her life. The next scene shifts to Omnia Medical Examination Center. Inside, we see Gisu with his injuries finally patched up. He's getting an earful from his father, who's clearly disappointed in him. His dad doesn't hold back, making it clear that Gisu deserves every one of those injuries because, as he puts it, if you're going to play stupid games, you're going to win stupid prizes. The arrogant mother starts yelling at her husband, clearly outraged. She reminds him that their son is in the hospital, and this is all he has to say? She tells him to go find the brute who did this and yell at him instead. She also points out that the same brute busted Huijin's arm too. Honestly, it's a real mess. Huijin is a bitch to the point that she even pinned the blame of her own mishap on our boy. We all know that she tripped and banged up her shoulder, but instead of taking responsibility, she's blaming him for everything. The angry father finally calms down and lets out a deep sigh. The concerned mother tells her son to just focus on resting and recovering. As they start to leave, the mother grumbles about making the kid who hurt their son pay if she ever gets her hands on him. Once they're gone, Gisu finally asks his sister why she had to tell their parents everything. He explains that by doing so, she's just made things worse for him. He feels humiliated that people will think he ran to their parents like a whining brat after getting beaten up. His sister then asks how she was supposed to hide the fact that her brother was in the hospital and that her arm was broken. Gisu gets pretty ticked off and demands to know if Jin was the one who did this to her arm. She remembers how she tripped and fell, but she doesn't mention that to him. Instead, she just says that Jin was responsible. It's messed up how she's shifting the blame so shamelessly. She then quickly stands up and tells him to just stay here and get better. She says she'll make sure they realize once and for all who they're dealing with. Jisoo sits there, unsure if they should mess with our boy again. Meanwhile, we're back with their parents. The woman reveals that she's just spoken to Mr. Cha, but her husband asks why she's complicating things and tells her to let the school handle it. The woman responds that it's Saturday already, and she doesn't want to sit back and twiddle her thumbs waiting for them. She starts yelling, pointing out that the school won't deliver real justice for what was done to their kids, and they'll likely only settle for a suspension or expulsion at best. The husband continues to argue, saying she has no business going to Mr. Cha to handle this personally. The woman reveals that she already knows Mr. Cha and that he's been handling his dirty work for years. Meanwhile, Huijin is eavesdropping and feeling pretty smug about her mother contacting Mr. Cha. She knows that Mr. Cha is the scary gangster who works for her father, and she's sure this will put an end to those troublemakers once and for all. The scene shifts to a rundown place where a man is fidgeting with his lighter, clearly on edge. Two goons walk by, looking pretty disappointed. They grumble about being ordered by their boss to handle some teenage drama, and none of them are thrilled about it. Even the boss himself isn't thrilled about dealing with this kid's squabble. But hey, a job's a job, even if it means wading through a mess of teenage nonsense. The scene flashes back to a time where a luxury Mercedes is zooming down the road. Inside the car, Mr. Cha, the mafia boss, takes a call from the woman. She fills him in on how her daughter's hand got fractured, and her son got beaten up by some teenager. She's insisting that he needs to handle it. Cutting back to the present, Mr. Cha is puffing out smoke from his cigarette, clearly fuming. He's beyond frustrated that he has to deal with this kind of nonsense as well. The scene transitions back to the quarters, where our boy is sitting before his computer, still lost in thought about his encounter with the Gisu. He's wondering if these guys are really going to let it go. Suddenly, the doorbell rings. He hears his grandpa arguing with someone at the door. It turns out that the people at their doorstep want to see Jin. The intimidating man outside claims they just want to talk to Jin for a bit. Grandpa, concerned about the late hour, questions what could be so urgent. Our boy steps out of his room, telling his grandpa that he'll be back soon after he hears what they want. Despite Grandpa's reluctance and even his sister's protests, Jin flashes a pleasant smile. He reassures them that he knows these guys and that it's just a quick chat, nothing to worry about. With that, our boy leaves his concerned grandpa behind. The goons take him to an abandoned construction site, and he wonders who they might be taking him to meet. When they finally arrive, the lackeys report to their boss that they've brought the guy in question. The boss remains silent, puffing on his cigarette. The bald lackey reveals that the kid caught on quickly, didn't make a fuss, and just came along. The boss, a bit surprised and pleased, decides to make it quick. He snaps his fingers, and the lackeys immediately grab their iron bats. One lackey tells his friend to hold our boy's arm, as he'll be the one to dish out the beating. Meanwhile, the boss sighs and decides to text the mother, letting her know that he's taken care of the job. While the boss scrolls through his phone looking for that mother's number, the lackeys ask him why our boy had to mess with the kids of Kim family. As soon as our boy hears the mention of kids, he realizes this must be about Gisu Kim. The boss, feeling frustrated and annoyed, pauses his scrolling, deciding he shouldn't call her while our boy is present. However, he looks over at our boy and is intrigued by how unfazed and emotionless he appears. Just as the lackeys charge at him, Jin suddenly uses his ninja-like speed. He grabs the bald lackey's hand before he can swing at him and pushes the man toward him, delivering a brutal shoulder smash right to the lackey's face. The boss watches this with his wide-eyed eyes, as he witnesses this flawless execution of the move. Meanwhile, the other lackey, bat in hand, swings at our boy. He ducks, letting the bat swoosh harmlessly over his head. But the lackey tries another swing, but our boy charges at the bat as if it's no big deal, leaving the mafia boss utterly bewildered. With lightning speed, our boy locks the baseball bat in his arm and delivers a brutal punch right under the lackey's chin. Not stopping there, he follows up with a devastating blow to the lackey's chest. Then, with a fierce grip, he grabs the lackey by the neck and throws him down onto the bricks below. The boss watches in shock, clearly impressed and flabbergasted by the sheer skill and audacity of our boy's moves. The bald lackey grabs our boy from behind, threatening him with death. But our boy quickly jabs his shoulder into the lackey's ribs, and then delivers a solid shoulder smash to his face, sending him crashing to the ground. Mr. Cha realizes that this kid is no average teenager, because his combat skills are exceptional. He finally decides to step in himself. As he strolls forward, he scratches his head, snickering and commenting that he never thought he'd be fighting teenagers at his age. Meanwhile, our boy can tell that even though this man is a mafia boss, he still is a weak sauce, because my guy can clearly spot all of the weak spots of this man. As the boss swings a powerful fist at him, Jin effortlessly sidesteps it. The boss then starts a barrage of punches, but our boy dodges each one with ease, making it look like a walk in the park. As they continue their back and forth, our boy quickly sidesteps, but another punch comes straight at him. He blocks the hit, though the heavy force makes him skid backward. The mafia boss sneers, impressed that he managed to block that one as well. Meanwhile, Jin checks his wrist where he took the punch and his hand winces from the aching pain. He realizes that the mafia boss predicted his movements and delivered the punch with precision. On the other hand, the mafia boss's curiosity has finally peaked, and he asks Jin who he really is. Jin casually replies that he's just a high school student. The boss isn't buying it. In his mind, he figures this kid must have some serious skill and experience to fight like this. Jin takes his stance. With a grin, the boss says he's up for sparring further, and balls up his fist to deliver a blow to our boy. Our boy quickly deflects an incoming punch and tries to throw one of his own, but the mafia boss sidesteps it effortlessly. The boss then attempts to attack, but our boy grabs his hand and swings a punch towards his gut. The mafia boss reacts again, causing our boy to end up landing a hit right to his face instead. Mr. Cha is absolutely annoyed after taking that hit right over his face and tries to swing another punch at our boy. Once again, our boy deflects the attack and, locking eyes with his opponent, delivers a brutal blow to his face. He follows this up with a series of powerful punches, knocking Mr. Cha to the ground, leaving him feeling utterly humiliated by a teenager. It's surprising to see a mafia boss who relies more on his fists than on guns. Anyway, once Mr. Cha is defeated, he grins, noticing that our boy doesn't seem rattled at all by the fight. He doesn't know where this kid came from, but he's sure that the Kim family definitely messed with the wrong person. The scene transitions to this agency, known as National Assembly Member In-Bai Kim. Inside the building, 2 guards are stationed outside an office. Inside the office, we see Mrs. Kim and Mr. Kim. The woman asks her husband why Mr. Cha hasn't responded yet. She is growing impatient with every passing second, tells him to call Mr. Cha. Mr. Kim responds that she should just wait, as Mr. Cha will call back once he is done dealing with our boy. On the other hand, we also see their daughter, who lets out a sigh, and just then, the telephone begins to beep. The impatient lady quickly tells her husband to put the call on speaker so she can hear the news herself. Mr. Kim begins by apologizing to Mr. Cha, saying he's sorry for the ridiculous favor his wife asked him to fulfill. But the women, however, continue to argue loudly, insisting that their kids were attacked, so she doesn't understand how it can be called ridiculous. To everyone's surprise, Mr. Cha says that he's the one who should apologize. Mr. Kim asks for an explanation, and Mr. Cha reveals that it seems their children have meddled with the wrong person, because Cha himself also had been defeated by our boy. This news rattles Mr. Kim to the core. As far as he knows, Mr. Cha is the best enforcer in the business, and it's unfathomable that he lost to a high school kid. Just then, the office door starts rattling as someone tries to force it open. Both Mr. and Mrs. Kim look anxiously at the door. When it finally creaks open, they see soldiers sprawled on the ground, leaving the husband and wife utterly anxious and alarmed. Even their bratty daughter jumps out of her seat when they see Jin strolling into the room. The door behind him slams shut, leaving their unconscious bodyguards on the other side. Mr. Cha, still on the phone, quickly realizes that Jin has made it into their place. He leans back, letting out a defeated sigh. He's still trying to wrap his head around the fact that he got beaten by a single high school kid. He's now anxious about how to deal with this mess. Inside the room, Hui-jin jumps up from her seat as Mrs. Kim starts yelling at Jin, demanding to know if he's the kid who beat up her children. On the other side, the man at the desk demands to know how Jin managed to get into his office. That is when this stupid woman begins to grit her teeth in frustration, because she is pissed that her husband is not overreacting like her. The husband remains calm and composed and asks again, more insistently, how Jin got past the security. Jin just shrugs and casually replies that he simply passed the guards blocking the entrance. Mr. Kim is even more shocked and confused, not understanding how Jin managed to beat Mr. Cha and all the security guards. What bothers him even more is how Jin even found out that he's living here. That shithead woman starts yelling again, telling Jin to stop giving them attitude. She quickly begins dialing the emergency hotline to report Jin for assaulting her kids and breaking into the office. Meanwhile, Hui-jin feels a sense of pride in her mother's actions. She believes that involving the police is a good move, thinking that even if Jin has impressive fighting skills, the law will take care of him. The arrogant mother tries to intimidate Jin with her threats, claiming she'll call the police or even the district attorney because she thinks Jin has no idea who he's dealing with. Jin, however, remains calm and responds that he has a pretty good idea. He points out that her husband is a second-term assembly member currently running for office. The woman scoffs, asking Jin if he knows so much about their status. Then why did he assault her kids? On the other hand, Hui-jin smugly sneers, feeling satisfied that they've cornered Jin, and faintly tells him that it's game over. The authorities pick up the call, and the lady starts yelling into the phone, demanding that the officers reach Kim's office right away. But before she can say anything more, she falls silent when she hears something unexpected. Apparently, Jin plays the full footage of the karaoke room where Hui-jin and her lackeys assaulted her sister. The undeniable evidence leaves Hui-jin speechless, her eyes widening in shock as if they might pop out of their sockets. Mr. Kim stays silent, feeling utterly devastated. The screams of Daeon begging for forgiveness echo through the room, as the trashy ladies continued to beat her to a pulp. Seeing the concrete evidence, Mrs. Kim's jaw drops, and she quickly hangs up the hotline, saying she'll call them back later. On the other hand, Hui-jin starts yelling at Jin, demanding to know how he got those files. Jin remains silent for a moment, and then the scene flashes back to the outside of the Kim's residence. Inside one of the rooms, Jin is seen sneaking around the house. He opens a laptop and copies all of the data onto a pen drive. In the present, Mr. Kim grits his teeth in frustration, feeling that his kids are a total disappointment. But Hui-jin quickly tries to reassure her father, explaining that she had a good reason for everything. Mr. Kim, however, angrily tells her to shut up. Jin then reveals that he also has files involving Gisu Kim. He explains to the Kims that their children always save videos of their conquests. He states that he has dozens of clips showing their violent behavior, beating up kids at school, extorting money and valuables from their victims, and even the latest clip of his sister being assaulted by a group of girls at karaoke. Hui-jin is shaking like a leaf with all these truth bombs exploding around her, but her mother quickly jumps in to defend her daughter, claiming that our boy is just trying to threaten them and that he won't get away with it. But Jin reminds her that he didn't start this mess, and what he's doing now is hardly a threat compared to hiring a bunch of gangsters to attack him, and makes it clear that he has recorded all of it too. The father facepalms in utter disappointment, and asks our boy if he did all this just because his kids assaulted his sister first. Jin responds that, as a parent, they have the right to take their children's side at all costs, so as a brother, he will do whatever it takes to protect his sister as well. The man understands where he's coming from, and points out that they'll cover her treatment and offer a hefty settlement to make amends. But our boy makes it clear that this isn't necessary. The father is puzzled and asks what he means by that. He then inquires if Jin would like his kids to apologize to his sister. Hearing her father, Hui-jin grits her teeth and thinks to herself that she'd rather bite her tongue and bleed to death than apologize. On the other hand, our boy makes it clear that an apology won't undo the time his sister spent in fear and pain. So he insists that if they really want to compensate him, he wants his sister to never have to see Jisoo or Hui-jin Kim again. This demand rattles Huijin's nerves, but her father quickly agrees, stating that he'll have his kids transfer schools or perhaps even send them abroad to study. Naturally, the mother and daughter let out a piercing scream in protest, but the father quickly shuts them down and turns his attention back to our boy, asking if this would be enough to satisfy him. Our boy states that he wants them gone from the school starting tomorrow. In response, the father says he'll inform the school, and once that's settled, Huijin begins to cry, and her tears flow out involuntarily.